The Naval Academy Museum presents A History of the Navy in 100 Objects.
Having completed our discussion, for now, of the Navy and its role during the War of 1812, we pause our chronological narrative because May is the graduation month for both the Naval Academy and for the officers commissioning into the Navy through the Reserve Officers Training Corps. We will discuss the roles of officers and enlisted members of the Navy later on in our series, as well as the various ways people join the Navy both today and throughout the Navy's history. But for the month of May, it is timely that we think about the Naval Academy's history and its role in producing officers. After all, since this series uses objects located at the Naval Academy, it seems only fitting that we take a more in-depth look at the Academy itself and its stories, histories, and tradition. The term commissioned officer generally refers to members of the Navy or the Navy Reserve who have a degree from a 4-year college or university as a minimum educational requirement and who have gone through officer training. There are exceptions based off of extensive service experience. Commissioned officers can be thought of as the leadership and management team of the Navy and Navy Reserve, and each year the Naval Academy commissions 1,100 or so officers into the Navy and the Marine Corps. For the 4 years that these men and women are in training at the Naval Academy, they are known as midshipmen. Midshipman is an actual rank in the U.S. Navy, and the men and women of the Naval Academy are active duty sailors, subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the military's disciplinary code. The term midshipman is actually a term of British origin, and it gets its original name from the location where certain experienced sailors used to work and sleep, in the middle of the ship, or amidships. By the late 1700s, the term had evolved into the word for the young boys training to be officers on board ship. In the British Navy, midshipmen were often not even in their teens yet, but were expected to function efficiently and courageously in combat. They would be tutored in the naval sciences by the captain of the ship, and would be in charge of gun crews and hold other positions of responsibility, while at the same time studying and hoping to receive their commissions as officers. Since the American Navy borrowed much of its structure and regulation from the British Navy, it too incorporated midshipmen who joined at a very young age. Today's object is a knife often carried by midshipmen called a dirk. This particular knife belonged to Stephen Decatur when he was a midshipman and young junior officer. In our episode about the Don't Give Up the Ship flag, Oliver Hazard Perry, who entered the Navy as a midshipman at 13, but perhaps the most striking example of the young age at which midshipmen entered the Navy and saw combat is Admiral David Farragut, naval hero of the American Civil War, during which he uttered the famous statement at the Battle for Mobile, Alabama, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Farragut had entered the Navy over 50 years previously, at age 9, and had served during the War of 1812 on the USS Essex, under David Porter, another famous early naval leader. By age 12, Farragut had been placed in command of a prize ship that had been captured by the Essex. By 1814, Farragut had been wounded and captured by the British, and was still only 13 years old. Needless to say, midshipmen grew up quickly. Throughout the first half of the 1800s, midshipman training continued under the direct supervision of the captain of whatever ship the midshipman was assigned. In 1842, in a highly publicized incident, a midshipman by the name of Philip Spencer was hanged at sea for allegedly plotting a mutiny. This was a major factor in the opening of the Naval School on the Severn River in Annapolis, Maryland, in 1845 by Franklin Buchanan, under the direction of then Secretary of the Navy George Bancroft. This moved much of the training of midshipmen from the hands of individual captains to a more formalized education process, including both shipboard training and classroom academics. Ever since then, midshipmen of the U.S. Navy have been trained at the Naval Academy in Annapolis, with the exception of during the Civil War, when the midshipmen were transported to Newport, Rhode Island, aboard the famous USS Constitution. At that time, Constitution was assigned to the Naval Academy as a training ship. In later years, other commissioning and training sources like ROTC would also begin providing officers for the Navy and the Marine Corps. We now go to Jim Cheevers, longtime curator of the Naval Academy Museum, To learn a bit more about the background and history of today's object, Stephen Decatur's Midshipman dirk.
Hey, I'm Jim Cheevers at the U.S. Naval Academy Museum, and today we're looking at a dirk, D-I-R-K. The term came to us from Scotland. It was a knife that guys shoved into their belts. But in the Navy, dirks were primarily a weapon and a tool used by midshipmen. Midshipmen, of course, in those days were young teenagers, so this was sort of a junior weapon, a short bladed object that could also be used for close-in fighting. The one we're looking at belonged to Stephen Decatur, probably during the Barbary Wars and the quasi-war with France, when he was a young junior officer serving in our Navy. Decatur, of course, went on to become a very famous naval leader during the Barbary Wars and burning the frigate Philadelphia at Tripoli, and then in the War of 1812, in the United States versus Macedonian, and later died in a famous duel fought in the Bladensburg, Maryland against a fellow naval officer. But dirks, the term probably came from the Danish or Germanic language to Great Britain, and dirks became a common weapon used by the Scots in the 1600s and the 17th century. There was one issued dirk in the U.S. Navy just following the Civil War, the model 1869, but it didn't last very long in our service. It was very common, though, in the Japanese Navy. Young Japanese midshipmen always carried dirks right up into the 20th century. So it's a fascinating weapon, the dirk.